Want to go over a few problems that we've had recently to help get you ready for percent test, which is in about 9 days. All right, if you buy something for $800 and you have to pay 7.5% sales tax, you have a couple of ways of working that. One is to multiply 800 times 0.075. The leading zero to the left of the decimal point doesn't have to be there. I just like to have it call my attention to the decimal point. But the zero to the right has got to be there. That's 7.5%. If I put 0.75, that is 75%. But the sales tax is 7.5%. So you could add 0.075 times 800, add that to 800, you get 860. Notice I did not tell you to round it off to the nearest anything, but it's money. And you have been instructed, if it's money, to round it off to the nearest penny. This one, it didn't come up as an issue because it came out to be a nice whole number answer. The other way to work the problem is to recognize that $800 is 100% of $800. And when you add 7.5% of $800 to $800, you wind up with 107.5% of 800. And that is where the one comes from. That's the 100% of 800, and the 0.075 is the tax. If you multiply 800 by 1 point, the tax rate, you have got one step to get that answer, which is kind of cool. Number two, price of a TV went down from $970 to $570. Well, that's $400. You want to ask for the percent decrease. You want to calculate the percent decrease, and you do it by dividing by not the big number or the little number, but you divide by the old number, the original price before the price went up or down. You always divide by the old one. And give yourself a little room here, another extra decimal place, because when you change this to a percent, it's 41.23, blah, 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 percent. And it says rounded to the nearest 0.1%. That is where this 2 is, right there. And the 3 to the right of the 2 is not big enough to round it up to 41.3. Some folks on the quiz recently just put 41, but it says round to the nearest 0.1%. So do that. Again, I recommend you read the problem, work the problem, then read the problem again and be sure you answer the question. Number 3, she's going to put some money in the bank. How much, we don't know. But whatever she puts in there, she wants it to grow with interest so that the total of what she puts in together with 6% interest on that total would give her $800. Okay, this is, believe it or not, very similar to other problems. In this case, the unknown, I'm calling it X. You put in X dollars and you're going to get the X dollars back plus 6% of X. So that is essentially 106% of X dollars, and I want that to be 800. So what is 800, 106% of? Well, divide it by 1.06, and you get 754.71, and it rounds to 755. Why did I round it? It says round to the nearest dollar, and if you don't do that, there's no partial credit. Be sure you answer the question and round it as asked. Now, of course, number 4 is money. And the donut's 6.75, $6.75, taxes included. The tax rate is 7.75%. So how much of that 675 goes for tax and how much of it goes for the actual donuts? Well, the unknown price before tax is increased by 7.75% of it. That means that the 675 is 107.75% of something. And so I just have to divide that by 1.0775, and I get 6.2645. Now, it didn't say what to round it to, but it's money, and you always round money. In my class, you round it to the nearest penny unless I ask you to round it to something else. So you round it by looking at the digit to the right of the pennies. The 6 is the pennies. The digit to the right is 4. That's not big enough to make it 6.27. Now, you do not round like this. You don't say, well, 5 rounds the 4 to a 5, and now that the 4 is a 5, now that 5 rounds a 6 to a 7. It doesn't work like that. You look at only the digit to the immediate right of where you're going to round it to. You're going to round it to 6.26 or 6.27, and it only depends on that 4. Now, you can just subtract 675 minus 626 to get the tax. And you can write it as $ 0.49. Again, I like to put the zero there, but you don't have to. Or you can say 49 cents, but do not say 0.49 cents. 0.49 cents is almost a half a penny. 0.50 cents is a half a penny. $0.49, that's a half a dollar almost. Okay. So she's going to sell this car through a dealer. The dealer will profit 15% of the selling price. Notice, do not take 15% of her share and add it on. It won't work because then the dealer will get 15% of that. You have to realize that her share is the rest that's left after 15% of the selling price goes to the dealer. That's why you have to realize that that is the other 85%. So what is 44,880% of? I don't know. I got to divide that by 85% of. I divide that by 0.85, and I get $52,705.882, and that rounds to $52,705.88. The two I put out there to see if it was going to be big enough to make it 89 cents, but it's not. Why did I round it to the nearest penny? Because it's money. And I didn't say, so round it to the nearest penny. We've had this problem before. You got the drive-out cost, and it consists of the sticker price, 8% of the sales tax, which is the sale price, which is 10% less, all a bunch of words. So what we have to do first is subtract out the fees. They're not taxed. How do I know that? Because the 8% sales tax is on the cost of the truck, and the cost of the truck was 10% less than the sticker price. So what that means is the $16,961.40 is the sale price plus 8% of the sales price, which is 108% of the sales price, which I have to calculate by dividing that number by 1.08. I get 15,705, but that reflects, guess what? 10% discount. So that means that this is the other 90%. And that's why I have to divide it by 0.9, and I get 17,450. One student one time objected and said, that's the sticker price, but it can't be the sticker price because that's also the drive-out price. Well, guess what? It's the power of mathematics. What I did was I adjusted the fees to make that happen. I knew what number I wanted the answer to be, and I rigged it by rigging the 488.60. Wasn't that awful? Yeah, thank you. Number 7. Another one of these. She wants $128,000 cash, but 30% of the amount she withdraws from her retirement account goes to the government. That is not 30% of her 128,000. Do not multiply 128,000 by 30% and add it on, because if you do, the government will get 30% of that. So you have to recognize that she is going to get the other 70%. So what is 128,000 70% of? I don't know. I got to divide it by 0.7, and the answer will get bigger than 128,000. I get $182,857.14. Why did I round it to 182,857? Because it says right there, to the nearest dollar. And if you don't, oh well, if you leave the 14 cents on there, it will be marked wrong. Okay, the Spurs, 45 wins, 37 losses. That's 82 games. And if you divide, I asked for the percent of games that they've won. So the number of games won divided by the number of games played is 0.5487. Now it says right answer to the nearest 0.1%. What that means is where the 8 is. After you change it to a percent, the first digit to the right, that is the nearest 0.1%. That's the 0.1%. But the 7, however, is big enough to bump that up to 54.9%. And there is no other right answer. Okay, here we are with the government grant again. You get $1,250,000. The colleges has to contribute 5% of the total budget. The total budget is not $1,250,000. That's the grant. The total budget is unknown. However, If 5% of the total budget is the responsibility of the college, the remainder is the grant. That must be the other, guess what, 95%. What that means is $1,250,000 is 90, let's say 95. It's 95% because 5% is the responsibility of the college. So to figure out what that is 95% of, I divide 1,250,000 by 0.95, and I get that $1,315,789.47. I multiply it by 0.05 because the college, that's the total budget. The college pays that. Round to the nearest penny. Even if I didn't tell you to round to the nearest penny, it's money. So you always round it to the nearest penny unless otherwise instructed. Okay, selling price of a house. You got four little things here. 5% to the salesperson, 2% for insurance, 20% for salary, 3% for advertising. Add those together, 23, 25. That's 30%. So the rest is the lot, the labor, and the materials. The lot was $72,000. The labor was 500 hours at 25 bucks an hour, and the materials were $145,000. So you do 72,000, 500 times 25. I like to personally multiply 500 times 25 first, in case my calculator doesn't do order of operations, and then add 72,000 and add 145,000. And that will get me 229,500. However, that's not the answer either. This is the other 70% of the selling price. So what is this 70% of? Well, you just got to divide it by 0.7, and you get 327,857.14. Why did I round it to $327,900? Because it says so. Round your answer to the nearest $100. The hundreds place is where the 8 is. Oh, yeah, that's it. So you look at the 8, and the number to the right of it is 5. It's barely big enough to bump it up to 9. So it's $327,900. We've had this problem since the second day of the semester, not with these numbers, but you have grades, A's, B's, C's, D's, and F's, and you add those numbers together, you get 27 students. Now, to figure out what percent received each grade and round to the nearest 0.1%, you divide A's, B's, C's, D's, and F, divide each of those by 27, and give me 4 decimal places because you're going to round it off to the nearest 0.1%. So you move the decimal point 2 places to the right, and you get 14.81%. Oh, yeah. And the 1 is just there to see if it should be 14.9, but it's not. Let's write that out so that it makes a little bit more sense. That's changing it to a percent. And it says the nearest 0.1%. That's where the 8 is. So is the 1 big enough to make it 14.9? The answer is no. So it rounds to 14.8. Likewise, 22.22% rounds to 22.2%, not 2 2s. Now, this one, 0.4444, well, again, that is 44.44% rounded off. Now, the nearest 0.1% is the first 4 to the right of the decimal point, but the second 4 is not big enough. So that's why it's 44.4%. 3 out of 27 is 0.1 repeating, actually. So in that case, you're going to have 11.11%. To the nearest 0.1%, that's the first one, and the second one is not big enough to make it 11.2. And finally, 2 out of 27 turns out to be 0.0740, and that's equal to 7.40%. Now, that is the nearest 0.01%. I want the nearest 0.1%, and that's where the 4 is. Is the 4 big enough? Excuse me, is 0 big enough to bump 4 up to 5? No, it's got to be at least 5. And that's why the answer is 7.4%.